All right, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on December 11th, Thursday, 2014, and I'm going to start right off. As you can tell, this one has me thinking, and when I think, I like to smoke. And I want to start this one off with a question. What if all the banker deaths or suicides are related in a way that few of us have imagined? What if there is a foreign power possibly involved? And what prompted all my thoughts is the recent suicide or apparent murder, in my opinion, of Scott Young, the banker that jumped from his fourth floor London penthouse apartment and fell onto some railings, some iron railings in front of his apartment, and impaled himself. And I did some research. I've got one article from the Daily Mail and two from the Daily Telegraph in the United Kingdom about this gentleman. And I want to read these to you. There's so much bizarre stuff going on here that it really gives me pause. And let me start with the Daily Mail article. Quote, a banker has died after becoming impaled on railings after falling 60 feet from the window of a luxury penthouse in central London, which is next door to John Lennon's former home. Police were called to the exclusive block of flats in Montague Square at about 5:20 p.m. yesterday, but were unable to save the man, who was in his early 50s. Firefighters had to help the police cut through the 5-foot-high metal railings with an angle grinder as part of attempts to free the man. The $3 million split-level flat is next door to a property which used to be owned by Beatles frontman John Lennon, where Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and Jimi Hendrix all stayed in the 1960s. A blue heritage plaque outside the property, which Lennon shared with Yoko Ono, confirms the musician lived there in 1968. It was first bought by Ringo Starr in 1965 and later rented out to McCartney. And so on in that vein. But that's what I want to bring your attention to in that first Daily Mail reporting of the article. And the reason why I find this strange is the coincidences are beginning to pile up here. Lennon, of course, was murdered. In my opinion, I find his murder very suspicious due to the fact that Lennon, believe it or not, folks, was a quiet, behind-the-scenes financial contributor through a secondary to Mae Brussell, the famous American conspiracy theory researcher and radio talk show host. So Lennon, there's a Lennon-Brussell and therefore JFK connection. But the other thing I find funny here is that this is Montague Square, and that's spelled Montagu, which is the spelling, incidentally, of the first name of Montague Norman, who was, of course, the first, one of the first most famous heads of the Bank of England in the early 20th century. So, all that's coincidence, and that's kind of interesting stuff that I thought I should mention. But now we get really interesting. The Daily Telegraph in the United Kingdom came up with two articles, and I'll have to read the sections that interest me to you. The first one is from an article titled Scott Young, Ring of Death. That's the name of the man that jumped, or in my opinion, was thrown out of his apartment and impaled. Scott Young, Ring of Death, claims after 4 friends also commit suicide. This is dated just today from the Daily Telegraph, and another one from the Daily Telegraph. Friends of the bankrupt property tycoon. So, real estate, okay? And where else have we seen this? Well, we've seen it with Richard Talley. We've seen it with a couple of the other bankers. The bankrupt property tycoon Scott Young, who died falling from his 4th-story London flat, have urged the police to investigate a potential ring of death after it emerged that 4 of his close friends have all died in similar circumstances. Associates of the former multimillionaire have voiced concern after revealing that he is the fifth member of a tight circle of friends to have taken their own lives in the last 4 years. One friend who has known Mr. Young for the last 20 years said he feared the deaths might not be a coincidence and has suggested that Mr. Young could have been murdered by the Russian or Turkish mafia. And then further down in this article, in March of last year, the Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky, who was another close business associate of Mr. Young. So now we have a very significant connection between this man who was in real estate and a famous Russian oligarch, Boris Berezovsky, who, of course, was a principal target of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was another close business associate of Mr. Young, was found dead at his Berkshire home. Mr. Berezovsky, who is living in exile after falling out with Russian President Vladimir Putin, was discovered in the bathroom with a ligature around his neck. And then another Daily Telegraph article in Great Britain. This one from a friend who was claiming that Mr. Young was targeted by the Russian mafia. Scott Young, the tragic tycoon who died falling from his fourth-story London flat, owed millions of pounds to the Russian and Turkish mafia and was hung out of a hotel window by gangsters 2 years ago as a warning, as a friend has claimed. The body of the 52-year-old entrepreneur was discovered impaled on railings beneath his central London home. The man, who now fears for his own safety and asked not to be identified, told the Telegraph, "I do not believe for 1 minute Scott committed suicide. My heart tells me he was killed. There is no way he would have jumped to his death. I knew him very, very well. We have been friends for over 20 years. We are all very scared about what might happen. I believe Scott was murdered." He went on. 2 years ago, he was hung off the balcony of a hotel at the Dorchester by Russian mafia he had owed money to before he went to prison. He never went back there after that. He owed a lot of money to the wrong sort of people. He went on. Other friends claimed that Mr. Young had confided in them as recently as last month that he feared for his safety. One source told the Daily Mail he was very worried. He said he knew someone was following him. Many of Scott's friends aren't surprised that he died. Mr. Young, listen carefully, who was at his peak, was worth an estimated £400 million, claimed to have lost his entire fortune when a vast property deal in Russia known as Project Moscow collapsed in 2006. So there you have it. This man was number one in real estate. Number two, had apparently had some ties or connections to the Russian mafia, had at some point been a business associate of the Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky, and had apparently been hung out of a hotel room by the Russian mafia before. All right. Now, this brings up my wild and crazy, wacky, high-octane speculation of the day. Because thus far I've been suggesting that all of these deaths are somehow related. And I've been taking the tack that the deaths from Hong Kong to the United Kingdom to Belgium to Holland to France to Liechtenstein even, that all of these deaths may have been related to the vast hidden system of finance and its funding of American black projects, and that maybe these people stumbled on some aspect of it and they were being killed to keep the whole system quiet, and what I believe may have been simply the attempt of that system to burn the bad paper. But now with Mr. Young, we have an entirely different connection. We've got a connection to Russian mafia. We've got a connection to real estate, which was Richard Talley. We've got a connection to the Russian oligarchs. And that particular oligarch is as everybody knows, was a principal concern and target of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this raises the question, and we've seen the economic sanctions in the wake of the Ukraine, as to what may be going on here. And I grant you this is wild, high-octane speculation, but I've been saying all along that covert operations are a game that two or more can play. And I am wondering now, given Mr. Young's death and the connection, the significant connection to Russian mafia and to Mr. Berezovsky, to the Russian oligarchy, if there is not some other intelligence besides Western and American intelligence involved in what's going on with these bankers. Could we be looking at a shooting war, quite literally, between two factions within the international financial community? Two factions which have been at loggerheads quite definitely in recent years. So I suspect now that the ante just was raised a great deal with Mr. Young's death. We may be looking at fallout, perhaps even from the BRICS nations deciding to implement their own international financial clearing. We may be looking at fallout from whatever they may have learned about the hidden Western system of finance. But this banker's death is definitely significant, folks, because it's now a link to a completely different picture. It's now a link to the criminal underground, which has its own connections to that Western American hidden system of finance. We're now looking at a criminal underground with its own connections to the international drug trade, with its own connections to the Russian mafia, and so on and so forth. Now, we're also looking at a connection to the Russian oligarchs. So, folks, the ante was just upped. The bottom line, the minimum here is we're now looking at an international, in my opinion, we have an indicator and corroboration that we're looking at an international kind of financial elite mafia war going on, and that some of these people, for whatever reason, find themselves in the crosshairs. And it's significant now that many of these people were involved in real estate, mortgage titles, electronic high-frequency algorithmic trading, BOLI, bank-owned life insurance policies, and so on and so forth. So the game is going to get very interesting. I now think even more likely that this might be some covert operation, or perhaps two covert operations of two different parties. Now, that's it for my news and views speculation. I do want to update you very briefly about Georgianne Hughes. She is not doing well, folks. Please, please keep her in your prayers. Do contact her directly. Please don't send emails to me and ask me to forward them. I simply don't have enough time to do all that. Georgianne does have someone there, another friend of mine now, trying to help her, that just arrived. So please keep Georgianne in your prayers. Anyway, that's it, folks, for today's news and views. I want to say goodbye and thank you to everybody who's been sending me so many wonderful articles. Thank you for all the donations, and we'll see you on the flip side, everybody.